Hello, dear listeners. Welcome to the English Globe, and thank you for joining us in this new episode, where we use slow, clear, and simple English to help you understand complex world topics, because our mission is to support learners who want to improve their listening skills and build confidence while exploring global issues that often appear in international news, but are rarely explained in a friendly and easy-to-follow way.
We are very happy that you are here with us today. And before we begin discussing the main theme of this episode, we want to remind you that your support means a lot to us. So please like this video if you find it helpful, subscribe to the English Globe for more educational podcasts, and kindly write in the comments where you are listening from, along with your thoughts about today's topic, because your messages motivate us and help us understand what subjects you want to learn about next.
Today we are exploring a question that many people around the world talk about, especially when they see headlines related to global security and diplomacy, and the question is North Korea the biggest threat to America today? But instead of giving dramatic answers or emotional reactions, we will guide you through this topic calmly, using simple language to help you understand the background, the concerns, and the reasons this question continues to appear in discussions about international relations.
This topic is important for English learners because it gives you the chance to listen to new vocabulary about world affairs, communication between countries, and the way governments make decisions when they face security challenges. And even though these ideas may sound difficult at first, we will explain everything carefully so that you can follow each part with confidence and learn how global issues shape conversations in the modern world.
We also want to remind you that this podcast is not about taking political sides or supporting any specific viewpoint, because our purpose is educational and focused entirely on helping learners understand how countries interact, why tensions sometimes appear, and how the world responds to different events, all while improving your English listening and comprehension through long, clear, and thoughtful explanations.
By the end of this episode, we hope you will feel more comfortable understanding news about North Korea, the United States, and other international topics. And we encourage you once again to share your opinions in the comments, because your ideas help us create more meaningful episodes, and they allow students from different parts of the world to learn from each other in a positive and respectful community.
North Korea, which is officially called the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, is a country located in East Asia on the northern part of the Korean peninsula, and it shares a long land border with China, a smaller border with Russia, and a heavily guarded border with South Korea, while its eastern coastline touches the Sea of Japan, creating a strategic geographic position that shapes much of its history, economy, and relationships with neighboring countries in ways that international observers often study closely to better understand regional dynamics.
To help English learners understand North Korea more clearly, it is useful to look at the country's history in simple steps. Because after World War II, the Korean peninsula was divided into two separate states influenced by different global powers, which eventually led to the creation of North Korea in the north and South Korea in the south. And this division set the foundation for many challenges, misunderstandings, and long-lasting tensions that continue to influence discussions about security, diplomacy, and cooperation in the region today.
North Korea has been ruled by the same political family for decades, and the current leader is Kim Jong-un, who represents the third generation of leadership in this system. And although leadership structures in North Korea are different from many countries around the world, we explain these facts only to provide students with clear background knowledge, because understanding how leadership works in different countries is important for learning how government systems shape national decisions, public policies, and interactions with the international community.
Another important aspect to understand is that North Korea is often described as one of the most isolated countries in the world, meaning that it has limited economic cooperation, restricted communication with many nations, and tight control over information that enters and leaves the country. And this isolation has contributed to unique cultural, social, and economic conditions that differ greatly from other nations, which is why global leaders, scholars, and journalists frequently analyze the country to understand how isolation influences its development and long-term strategies.
When we talk about North Korea's economy, we must use simple and neutral explanations, because the country has a centrally controlled economic system where the government directs most production, distribution, and trade activities, and because of limited access to global markets and international sanctions created in response to specific actions taken by the country, North Korea often faces shortages, slow economic growth, and challenges related to technology, industry, and agriculture, all of which make its economic structure very different from those of more open and interconnected nations.
The reason North Korea often appears in global news is mainly related to its military development, especially its missile tests and nuclear program, which many countries around the world watch closely due to concerns about regional stability and potential risks. And although these topics can sound frightening, our goal in this podcast is not to create fear or tension, but to give learners a simple understanding of why international organizations, analysts, and diplomats frequently discuss North Korea's actions and their possible effects on regional relations.
Besides military topics, North Korea also becomes part of the global conversation because of humanitarian issues, diplomatic negotiations, and cultural events that occasionally open small windows of communication between North Korea and other countries, and scholars often note that even small diplomatic steps, such as meetings between leaders or agreements to reduce tensions, become widely reported in international media because they offer rare moments of dialogue in a region that usually experiences political distance and limited cooperation.
Geography plays a major role in understanding North Korea, because its position between China, South Korea, Russia, and nearby Japan creates a situation where its decisions influence not only its own people, but also the strategies of neighboring countries. And even though North Korea has a relatively small population compared to other global powers, its location and military capabilities make it a central point of attention in discussions about security, peace talks, and international policies related to East Asia.
While many nations share goods, ideas, culture, and travel through open borders and international exchange, North Korea has chosen a different path by maintaining strict internal control and limiting the flow of foreign products, media, and technology. And this controlled environment shapes how citizens experience daily life, how businesses operate, and how the government manages national resources, all of which contribute to the image of isolation that is frequently mentioned in documentaries, academic reports, and political discussions about the country.
For English learners, studying North Korea in a neutral and educational way helps develop vocabulary related to geography, history, leadership, economy, and international relations, while also building listening skills through long, clear sentences that explain global topics without promoting opinions or encouraging any political viewpoint. And this approach allows students from all backgrounds to understand the world more deeply while staying focused on learning English through balanced and respectful explanations.
In summary, North Korea is a unique nation with a complex history, a distinct leadership structure, an isolated economic model, and a significant role in international conversations about security and diplomacy. And by exploring these elements in simple language, we hope to give learners a clearer picture of why this country continues to receive widespread global attention, helping you build both your knowledge and your English comprehension as we prepare to move into deeper sections of today's analysis. To understand why the United States and North Korea have long-lasting tension, we need to look back at the history of the Korean Peninsula in a calm and simple way, because after World War II, the peninsula was divided into two separate countries supported by different global powers, and this division created mistrust, competing political systems, and disagreements about how the future of the peninsula should be shaped, which still influence relations today even after many decades of diplomatic attempts and security discussions.
The Korean War, which started in 1950 and paused with an armistice in 1953, is a major reason why tension continues. Because although the fighting stopped, no official peace treaty was signed, meaning the two Koreas are technically still in a state of conflict. And because the United States supported South Korea during the war, while North Korea received support from other major countries, the conflict created a long historical memory that affects how leaders on both sides understand each other's intentions and decisions today.
When we look at diplomatic challenges between the US and North Korea, it is important to use simple and balanced explanations, because the two countries have different political systems, different security goals, and different expectations about how the region should be managed. So when diplomats try to negotiate, they often face difficulties related to trust, communication, and the conditions each side requires before cooperation can move forward. And these differences make progress slow and complex, even when both sides express interest in reducing tension.
For English learners, it is helpful to understand the term security concerns, because this phrase is used often in global news, and it simply means worries that a country has about its safety, stability, or ability to protect itself from possible dangers. And in the case of North Korea and the United States, each side views the other's military actions carefully. And this careful watching can create stress, because when one country tests weapons or strengthens alliances, the other country feels uncertain about what might happen next.
One challenge is that North Korea has developed missile technology and a nuclear program that many countries worry about. And even though the US has far greater military power, it still views North Korea's actions as unpredictable and potentially dangerous, which leads to sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and requests for denuclearization. But from North Korea's perspective, these weapons are often described as necessary for their own security, creating a cycle where each side believes it must react to the other's moves to protect its interests.
Another important element is the presence of US military forces in South Korea, because North Korea sees these forces as a sign of possible threat, while the United States and South Korea describe them as a protective measure to maintain stability in the region. And this difference in interpretation makes communication difficult, since the same action can be seen as peaceful by one country but worrying by the other, showing how security concerns depend on perspective, history, and national experience.
Diplomatically, the US and North Korea have tried several times to negotiate agreements involving freezing nuclear programs, reducing missile tests, or opening lines of communication, and although some meetings created hope for progress, many agreements collapsed because of disagreements about verification, timelines, or responsibilities, and these breakdowns increased frustration on both sides, making each future negotiation more complicated because diplomats must rebuild trust, clarify misunderstandings, and find language that both countries accept.
It is also important to recognize that the region around North Korea has many powerful countries with their own interests, such as China, South Korea, Russia, and Japan. And because each of these nations has different views about stability and cooperation, the US-North Korea relationship is influenced not only by their own actions, but also by the goals and policies of neighboring states, which makes the situation more complex, since decisions in one country can create reactions across the entire region.
Even though the tensions can sound alarming, it is useful to remember that many international experts emphasize diplomacy as the best long-term approach, because peaceful discussions, gradual agreements, and confidence-building steps can reduce misunderstandings and lower the chances of conflict. And although progress is slow, history shows that even small acts of dialogue, such as opening communication channels or pausing certain military activities, can create opportunities for larger agreements in the future when conditions become more favorable.
For learners of English, understanding the history of the US-North Korea tension helps you read global news with more confidence, because you can recognize why these two countries sometimes exchange strong statements, why international organizations closely follow North Korea's military activities, and why diplomats invest so much time trying to maintain stability, And by learning this in simple language, you gain both linguistic skill and global awareness without being pushed toward any political opinion or emotional viewpoint.
In simple terms, the tension exists because of unresolved history, major differences in political systems, challenges in communication, disagreements about military programs, and the involvement of other regional powers. And by exploring these ideas step by step, we can understand that the situation is not about simple good or bad sides, but about complex interactions built over many decades, which makes this topic an important lesson in patience, diplomacy, and the need for clear communication between nations. When people hear about North Korea, they often think about its military, so let's explain it in a calm, simple way. North Korea has an army that is very large for its size, and the government focuses heavily on defense. A lot of this military strength comes from many years of tension in the region, especially with South Korea and the United States. North Korea also does missile tests, which are launches of rockets into the sky to show technology and send political messages. These tests often appear in the news, and they can create fear, but they are usually demonstrations, not signs of an immediate conflict.
Many English learners hear words like missile, test, or launch and feel confused, so let me explain in simple English. A missile is basically a long, fast object that moves through the sky. A test means the country is checking how the missile works. A launch simply means they send it upward to see how far it travels. These tests are often talked about because other countries watch them carefully. But it's important to remember that the news sometimes makes these events feel bigger or more dramatic than they truly are.
Another term that appears in global news is nuclear program. This phrase sounds scary, so let's break it down. A program simply means a long-term plan or project. Nuclear, in this context, refers to a type of extremely powerful energy that can be used for technology, science, or, according to public reports, military strength. When people say North Korea has a nuclear program, they mean the country is working on technologies connected to nuclear energy. We are not talking about how to make anything, only the political meaning. Other countries worry because nuclear energy, when used in weapons, is extremely dangerous, so it becomes a big topic in diplomacy.
It's also important for beginner students to understand what military posture means. This phrase does not refer to physical standing. It describes how a country shows its strength and how ready it wants to appear. North Korea's posture is usually firm and defensive. The government tries to show that it is strong, partly to protect itself and partly to send messages to the world. But this does not mean war will start. It means the country wants to look powerful, especially during political disagreements.
When we talk about these capabilities, we are not talking about any hidden or dangerous information. Everything we discuss is open to the public and already known from international news. Experts around the world say that North Korea's military is large but faces many challenges, such as old technology, limited fuel, and economic problems. This is why, even though headlines sometimes sound dramatic, many specialists explain that the country is not as strong as the news makes it seem. Understanding this balance helps learners see global events more clearly.
Another simple idea to understand is deterrence. This means a country wants others to think twice before acting against it. North Korea uses its military image as a form of deterrence. It wants the world to believe it should not be threatened. But deterrence is often more about appearance than action. Countries use it to prevent conflict, not to start it. When you understand this word, the news becomes easier because many countries, not only North Korea, use the same idea.
Finally, when we talk about North Korea's military capabilities in beginner English, the goal is not to increase fear. The goal is understanding. We want learners to see that international issues are often more complex and less dramatic than they sound. The missiles, the tests, the nuclear program. These are political tools that the country uses to show strength, not everyday dangers. By learning the simple meaning of these terms, you can read or watch global news with more confidence and less confusion. When experts discuss whether North Korea is the biggest threat to the United States today, they often begin by comparing different kinds of global challenges, because modern security is not only about armies or weapons, but also about technology, economics, communication, cyber activities, and international cooperation. So specialists look at many categories before making conclusions, and this careful comparison shows that North Korea is an important concern, but not the only issue shaping the security decisions made by major countries around the world.
To help English learners understand this more clearly, it is important to learn the term threat perception, which simply means how dangerous something appears from a specific point of view. Because a country might consider one issue extremely serious, while another country believes a different issue is more urgent. And this difference happens because countries have unique histories, geographic positions, alliances, and national experiences that shape how they understand risks. So threat perception is not fixed, but changes depending on who is examining the situation.
Experts often say that North Korea is a concern because of its missile tests, nuclear program, and unpredictable actions, and these developments sometimes create tension in East Asia, especially for nearby countries such as South Korea and Japan. But when specialists compare North Korea with global challenges like cyber attacks, international terrorism, economic instability, climate-related risks, and technological competition among major powers, they note that many issues influence global security at the same time, each with different levels of impact and frequency.
In simple language, threat perception means that something can feel like a major danger even if it is not the only one. And countries often rank threats differently depending on what they are experiencing. Because some nations worry more about economic problems, others worry about technology competition, and others focus on regional conflicts that affect trade, alliances, or daily life. So when people say North Korea is a threat, it does not always mean it is the single greatest threat, but rather that it is one topic that requires attention and careful monitoring.
When comparing global challenges, security analysts usually break issues into categories such as short-term risk, long-term risk, regional impact, and global impact. And North Korea's actions are often placed in the category of regional stability risks, because while the country has the ability to cause tension in East Asia, it does not have the same worldwide influence as large economic powers or global networks that operate across many countries, which is why specialists describe the situation as serious but not the only major issue facing the United States or the international community.
It is also helpful to understand that modern threats are not always physical or military, because cyber threats have become a major concern for many nations, as digital systems manage banking, communication, transportation, and government operations. And when these systems are targeted by hackers, the impact can be felt instantly across continents. So some experts argue that cyber threats, misinformation, and digital sabotage are becoming as important as traditional military concerns, showing how complex global security has become in recent years.
Economic competition is another major factor that shapes how countries understand threats, because changes in trade, supply chains, currency values, and international markets can influence millions of people at the same time. And this kind of pressure can affect a nation's long-term strength more deeply than isolated military activities. So analysts often describe economic challenges from large global powers as significant issues that must be studied alongside the question of North Korea to understand the full picture of today's security environment.
When experts discuss these comparisons on news programs or in academic reports, they often use phrases like multidimensional threats or complex security landscape, which means that no single issue can explain the entire situation, because different challenges overlap and influence one another, and North Korea's actions connect to diplomatic relations, military planning, regional cooperation, and international law. Yet, these are only parts of the larger environment that includes climate pressures, migration patterns, energy demands, and technological rivalry among powerful nations.
Another important point is that the United States evaluates threats not only by capability, but also by intent, meaning that analysts study what another country is capable of doing and what it actually plans to do. And while North Korea has certain capabilities that raise concerns, experts also look at its desire to maintain stability within its own borders, its interest in negotiating at certain times, and its need for economic improvement, which makes the situation complex, because threat level is not measured only by strength, but by a combination of behavior, goals, and context.
For English learners, this topic is useful because it teaches how countries interpret risk and how media reports sometimes highlight one issue more than others, even though governments examine many challenges at once. And by understanding the idea of threat perception, learners can read international news with more confidence, recognizing that some statements describe potential risks rather than confirmed dangers, and that security discussions often include analysis, prediction, and careful judgment rather than simple yes or no conclusions.
In summary, North Korea is an important country in global security discussions because of its military programs, geographic position, and unpredictable actions. But experts generally agree that it is not the only major challenge facing the United States or the world today, since modern security involves many issues including economic competition, cyber threats, regional conflicts, global health, environmental change, and technological rivalry. And understanding this balanced view helps us see that international relations require patience, cooperation, and clear communication rather than dramatic or emotional responses. When we look at how the United States approaches its relationship with North Korea, it is important to understand that modern international relations rely heavily on peaceful tools rather than constant conflict, and these tools include diplomacy, cooperation with allies, communication through international organizations, and the use of economic measures that create pressure without using violence. And together these strategies form what experts call a comprehensive approach designed to manage challenges while encouraging stability and preventing misunderstandings that could lead to unnecessary escalation in the region.
For English learners, diplomacy is one of the most important words to know, because it simply means the process of countries talking to each other in a respectful and strategic way to solve problems, reduce tension, and avoid conflict. And diplomats meet in conferences, private discussions, and international forums where they negotiate agreements, exchange information, and build trust. And even though progress can be slow, diplomacy is considered a safer and more responsible approach than reacting with quick or aggressive actions that could create more problems rather than solutions.
A key part of the U.S. strategy involves strong alliances, especially with South Korea and Japan, because these countries share geographic proximity to North Korea and have their own security concerns, so cooperation helps them respond to challenges together rather than acting alone. And this cooperation includes sharing intelligence, conducting joint military training for defensive purposes, coordinating diplomatic messages, and supporting long-term efforts to keep the region peaceful, which allows the three countries to act in a unified way that encourages stability and makes communication with North Korea more organized and predictable.
For listeners who are learning English, it may be helpful to understand why alliances are significant, because an alliance is basically an agreement between countries to support each other in times of crisis, maintain peace, and protect shared interests. And in the case of the United States, South Korea, and Japan, these agreements create a network of cooperation that helps all three nations respond more effectively to regional issues. And they also provide reassurance that none of the countries must face difficult situations alone, making the region stronger and calmer through shared responsibility.
Another peaceful strategy the U.S. uses is the support of international discussions through organizations such as the United Nations, because these meetings allow many countries to talk about North Korea together and create unified expectations about behavior, cooperation, and security. And when the global community agrees on rules, it becomes easier to manage difficult situations, because countries can work within the same framework instead of issuing separate responses that might conflict or create confusion. And this type of coordinated diplomacy is considered essential for long-term peace and stability.
One of the most important concepts for English learners to understand in this topic is the idea of sanctions, which is a word often used in news reports. And sanctions simply mean limits or restrictions placed on a country's economy, trade, or financial activities as a peaceful way to encourage that country to change certain actions. And instead of using force, sanctions apply pressure by reducing access to resources, technology, or international markets, which can influence decision-making without harming civilians directly or escalating the situation with military measures.
Sanctions used by the U.S. and the international community are usually targeted, meaning they focus on specific industries or individuals rather than the entire population, because the goal is to influence government decisions, not make life harder for ordinary people. And these targeted sanctions often include limits on banking, transportation, exports, or the movement of certain goods. And although the effects are sometimes debated among experts, sanctions remain a central tool because they allow countries to express concern and encourage negotiation without resorting to physical confrontation.
For beginners in English, it may help to compare sanctions to rules set by a teacher to guide student behavior, because sanctions work in a similar way by signaling that certain actions are not acceptable under international agreements. And they also show that cooperation can lead to better outcomes, while disallowed actions bring consequences. And even though international relations are far more complex than a classroom example, this simple comparison helps learners understand that sanctions are intended as peaceful pressure rather than punishment or force.
While sanctions and diplomacy are important, cooperation with allies remains one of the strongest parts of U.S. strategy in East Asia, because the partnership with South Korea is built on decades of communication, shared values about stability, and a commitment to protect peace on the Korean peninsula. And this relationship allows the United States to support defensive readiness, while also encouraging South Korea to take the lead in many peace-building efforts, which is essential because South Korea has deep cultural, geographical, and historical ties to the issues surrounding North Korea.
Japan also plays a major role in this network of cooperation because it is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world and provides strong diplomatic support, economic strength, and monitoring capabilities that help the region stay informed and prepared. And Japan coordinates closely with South Korea and the United States during moments of tension, offering resources, intelligence sharing, and communication channels that help everyone understand what is happening and respond in a calm and responsible manner that reduces the risk of misunderstanding between nations.
Another important part of U.S. strategy is building communication channels that can be used even during moments of tension, because international problems become far more dangerous when countries stop speaking to each other, and having a line of communication open, whether through diplomats, humanitarian organizations, or quiet back-channel dialogue, allows both sides to reduce confusion, share concerns, and explain actions before they lead to unintended escalation. And this idea supports the belief that communication, even if limited, is one of the most effective ways to maintain peace.
For English learners, understanding these strategies helps build a clearer picture of how countries maintain stability without relying on conflict, because diplomacy, alliances, sanctions, and communication channels all work together to create a safer environment. And while each tool has its own strengths and challenges, they all share the same purpose: reducing misunderstandings, encouraging cooperation, and managing disagreements in a peaceful and predictable way, which is why governments invest so much time, effort, and resources into these non-military approaches.
In summary, The U.S. strategy for dealing with North Korea is not based on one single action, but on a combination of peaceful tools that include working closely with allies like South Korea and Japan, supporting international dialogue, using sanctions to encourage responsible behavior, and maintaining diplomatic communication whenever possible. And by understanding these methods in simple English, listeners can appreciate how international relations are guided not only by power or military strength, but also by patience, cooperation, and the constant search for long-term stability. North Korea's actions often create attention in Asia because the region includes many important countries, and when something changes in one place, the whole area can feel the effects. So today we will talk slowly and clearly about how North Korea influences peace, trade, and diplomacy in a way that is easy for English learners to follow without confusion. When North Korea conducts military activities, nearby countries like South Korea and Japan pay close attention, because these actions may affect their security planning, and this can lead to more cooperation between these countries as they try to keep their citizens safe and maintain stability in the region.
To help our listeners, I want to explain the idea of stability, which means a situation where things are calm and predictable, allowing people and governments to feel confident in their daily decisions. And whenever something unexpected happens, it can make the whole region feel uncertain, which is why North Korea becomes part of many international conversations.
Sometimes North Korea's actions make governments increase communication with each other, and this communication is important because it allows countries to share information quickly, avoid misunderstandings, and make clear decisions based on facts, which helps reduce tension and supports cooperation in East Asia.
Another key idea is how North Korea influences global trade, even though it is not a major trading country, because when businesses hear news about rising tension in Asia, they sometimes become cautious, and they might change shipping plans, adjust routes, or delay investments to avoid possible risks that come from uncertain situations.
Many companies depend on smooth trade routes in the Pacific region, and if there is any sign of instability, shipping decisions may change, showing us how even small events in one country can affect businesses far away, because modern trade networks connect nations in ways that make global reactions much more sensitive.
Diplomacy also plays a big role, and diplomacy simply means peaceful conversations between countries. So when North Korea appears in global news, leaders from many nations begin talking, sharing viewpoints, and trying to understand the situation clearly, because open communication is one of the strongest tools for reducing tension.
The United Nations becomes involved during many of these discussions, and the UN provides a formal space for countries to talk about global concerns, ask questions, and present calming suggestions, which helps different nations understand each other better and avoid actions that might increase uncertainty or misunderstanding.
For English learners, it is helpful to understand what global concern means, because global concern refers to a situation that attracts attention from many countries, even if the event happens in a small part of the world, since modern news and international connections allow issues to spread across borders quickly.
North Korea often becomes a global concern because its decisions sometimes involve security topics, and countries want to be informed when such topics appear, so they can make calm and responsible choices that support peace, stability, and cooperation across regions that depend on each other for long-term safety.
It is important for learners to remember that discussing North Korea does not mean taking sides, because our goal is to understand how actions influence communication between nations, and studying these interactions helps people learn how global relationships work, which is useful knowledge for anyone interested in international issues.
North Korea also affects Asia through its relationships with nearby countries, and even small diplomatic events can shape the direction of these relationships, especially when governments try to balance their security needs with their interest in maintaining peaceful conversation and avoiding unnecessary conflict.
When North Korea makes decisions that draw international attention, it encourages other countries to think about new diplomatic strategies, and these strategies often involve meetings, agreements, and communication channels that help reduce risk and keep the region steady and predictable for everyone involved.
Another way North Korea influences the region is through its historical ties, because countries in Asia remember past events, and these memories shape how modern governments respond. So actions that might seem small today can still carry strong meaning across the region, affecting planning and cooperation for the future.
Countries also look at how North Korea's decisions might affect their own goals, including economic plans, development projects, and regional partnerships. And this connection shows how one nation's choices, even if limited, can shape long-term thinking for many governments that depend on peaceful conditions to grow.
International organizations continue to watch developments carefully, not to choose political sides, but to understand how every event fits into the larger picture, because these organizations focus on communication, safety, and stability, offering advice that encourages countries to work together peacefully.
For English learners around the world, understanding how North Korea influences Asia helps build a clearer picture of global relations, and it also offers a helpful chance to learn new vocabulary related to diplomacy, security, and international cooperation in a safe, neutral, and educational environment.
When people hear news about North Korea, it is common to see headlines that sound alarming or dramatic, and sometimes these stories are designed to attract attention quickly, because media outlets want readers or viewers to click and watch. But this can create a sense of fear that is not always accurate, so it is important for learners to understand that not everything reported is a clear representation of facts, and distinguishing between real events and exaggeration is a critical skill in today's world.
To help our listeners, let's define a simple term. A misunderstanding is when someone believes something that is not entirely correct, often because of incomplete information, rumors, or exaggeration. And in the case of North Korea, misunderstandings often appear because people focus on extreme examples, misunderstand statements from officials, or interpret actions without understanding the historical and regional context, which can make the situation seem worse than it actually is.
Media coverage sometimes emphasizes missile tests, military parades, or political statements in ways that make them appear threatening, even when the events are routine or symbolic. And this can lead audiences, especially people learning English or new to international news, to think that immediate danger is present, while in reality, many of these events are part of long-term planning, training, or ceremonial activities that are common in many countries around the world.
For English learners, it is helpful to understand the difference between facts and exaggerations, because a fact is a piece of information that can be verified and confirmed, while an exaggeration makes something seem bigger, worse, or more dramatic than it really is. And learning to identify these differences helps students read, listen, and understand news more accurately without being misled by overly emotional language.
Another source of misunderstanding comes from comparing North Korea to other countries without considering context, because North Korea's isolated nature, military activities, and limited communication with the outside world make it seem very mysterious. And when people fill the gaps with assumptions, stories can become distorted, which is why careful reading, analysis, and attention to verified sources are necessary skills for learners and anyone who wants to understand international news correctly.
Sometimes learners or viewers hear repeated statements that suggest extreme danger from North Korea, and they may believe these statements because repetition creates the feeling of truth, even if the information is incomplete or lacks evidence, and this is why we emphasize education. Understanding history, geography, and international relations helps separate what is likely, what is possible, and what is exaggerated for media attention.
It is also helpful to know that journalists and news organizations face pressures that influence how stories are written, because speed, popularity, and public interest often shape headlines more than detailed context, So while some reporting is accurate and careful, other reports may overstate risk or create fear unnecessarily. And this teaches English learners that understanding news requires more than reading or listening. It requires reflection, comparison, and patience.
For example, hearing about a missile test can sound frightening if presented alone, but learners should consider timing, frequency, distance, and intent, and recognize that many countries conduct military exercises for routine purposes without causing immediate threat. So by understanding these factors, listeners can see the difference between true danger and media exaggeration, which is an important skill for both language development and global awareness.
Another point is that myths often appear because people do not have access to reliable information, and myths are ideas or stories that are widely believed but are not completely accurate. And in the case of North Korea, myths can involve assumptions about military intentions, the country's economy, or the lives of citizens. And understanding myths helps learners avoid believing everything they hear and encourages careful thinking about international events.
To make this easier for English learners, remember that a myth is like a story that sounds true but is not fully verified. And these myths can spread quickly through social media, news clips, or casual conversations. So learners should develop the habit of checking sources, reading full articles, and asking questions about information before accepting it as fact, which improves comprehension skills and builds critical thinking in a safe educational way.
Media exaggerations and myths also affect how countries interact diplomatically. Because when public opinion believes in worst-case scenarios, governments may feel pressure to respond, even if the actual situation is manageable. So understanding the difference between perception and reality is crucial for learners who want to follow international news without becoming unnecessarily anxious or misinformed.
Finally, for English learners, it is helpful to practice recognizing exaggeration in simple language, because sentences with strong emotional words, repetitive claims, or statements without verification often indicate overstated information, and comparing these with verified facts allows learners to improve reading, listening, and critical thinking skills, while also gaining a balanced understanding of North Korea and global news coverage.
In conclusion, understanding media, myths, and misunderstandings is a key skill for anyone interested in international topics, because it teaches learners to separate real events from exaggerations, to recognize verified facts, to avoid fear based on incomplete information, and to improve both English skills and global awareness in a neutral, safe, and educational manner. When we think about the future of North Korea and its relationship with other countries, it is important to understand that predictions are always uncertain because international relations are influenced by many factors, including politics, leadership changes, economic developments, and unexpected events. And for English learners, this uncertainty shows us why experts often speak in terms of possibilities rather than fixed outcomes. So careful observation and patience are essential in understanding the direction of global diplomacy.
For learners, let's explain the idea of uncertainty in simple words. It means not knowing exactly what will happen, because many things can change quickly, and when countries interact, even small decisions can lead to big effects. So understanding uncertainty helps students read, listen, and think about international news without assuming that everything reported today will stay the same tomorrow.
In the context of diplomacy, future talks between North Korea and other nations could focus on issues such as communication, security guarantees, and economic cooperation. But these discussions often require patience, compromise, and careful verification of agreements, because trust is built slowly over time, and even when progress seems small, each step can help reduce tension, improve understanding, and make the region safer for all countries involved.
Diplomatic progress is not always straightforward, and learners should remember that peace talks often involve repeated meetings, exchanges of letters, and detailed discussions about specific actions. And while these processes may seem slow or even frustrating, they are important for creating long-term stability. because immediate solutions are rarely possible in complex international relations, especially when multiple countries and historical issues are involved.
Another important point is that uncertainty also comes from leadership changes, because new leaders in any country may have different priorities, strategies, or approaches to negotiation, and these changes can affect the pace and style of diplomacy, the types of agreements proposed, and the willingness to cooperate or compromise, which is why experts often use cautious language when discussing future possibilities rather than making absolute statements about what will happen.
English learners can also understand uncertainty by comparing it to a school project where group members may change their minds, take different approaches, or suggest new ideas, because in the same way, countries sometimes revise strategies or respond differently to events. And this analogy helps learners see that unpredictability is a normal part of both small and large-scale decision-making.
Looking at broader regional effects, future developments in North Korea may influence neighboring countries like South Korea, Japan, and China, because any agreements, misunderstandings, or new actions can impact trade, security planning, and diplomatic relations. And while we cannot predict exactly how these effects will unfold, it is clear that careful observation, cooperation, and clear communication will continue to be essential for reducing tension and promoting stability.
For English learners, it is helpful to know that prediction does not mean certainty. It means estimating what might happen based on current information, patterns, and expert analysis, and by practicing reading and listening to predictions, learners can improve comprehension skills and understand how experts communicate possibilities without making unrealistic claims or assumptions about international events.
It is also useful to consider the role of international organizations in shaping future outcomes, because groups like the United Nations provide platforms for negotiation, monitoring, and coordination among countries, which helps reduce misunderstandings and encourages peaceful solutions. And although these efforts cannot guarantee specific results, they increase the chances of constructive dialogue and measured responses in a world where unpredictable events are always possible.
English learners should note that terms like possibility, risk, and uncertainty are commonly used in discussions about the future, and learning these words helps students read global news, follow educational podcasts like this one, and discuss international relations in clear, beginner-friendly English, while maintaining a neutral understanding without expressing personal political opinions.
In summary, the future of North Korea's international interactions will likely involve cautious diplomacy, ongoing negotiation, attention to security concerns, and cooperation with regional and global partners. And while uncertainty is a constant factor, it also encourages careful observation, critical thinking, and patient engagement, which are valuable skills for anyone learning English and trying to understand global events calmly and accurately.
Finally, learners should remember that understanding the future of international relations is not about predicting specific outcomes, but about observing patterns, identifying challenges, and considering possibilities. And by following educational content in simple language, students can improve both their English and their awareness of how countries work together to promote peace, reduce tension, and create opportunities for cooperation in a complex and interconnected world.
So when thinking about the future, it is helpful to stay informed, practice patience, and focus on learning key vocabulary and concepts, because this approach allows English learners to engage with international news safely and thoughtfully, understand how uncertainty affects diplomacy, and gain confidence in following global developments without confusion or fear.
By combining careful observation, understanding of uncertainty, and knowledge of diplomatic processes, learners can build both language skills and global awareness. And this preparation makes it easier to follow future developments in Asia and around the world, while maintaining a calm, informed, and neutral perspective that is essential for safe and responsible learning.
Now that we have discussed North Korea, the United States, Asia, and the global context, It is helpful to review the key vocabulary and main ideas in simple English, because repetition and reflection are important for learning new words and concepts, and learners often remember information better when they hear it summarized clearly. So today, I will slowly recap the most important points from this episode, while keeping the language simple and easy to understand.
First, we learned the word threat perception, which means how dangerous something seems to a country or person. And we saw that different countries may feel differently about the same situation depending on their history, location, or experience. And understanding threat perception helps learners read news more carefully and avoid thinking that danger is always immediate or absolute.
We also discussed diplomacy, which is peaceful communication between countries to solve problems, make agreements, and reduce tension. And diplomacy is a key tool that allows countries to interact safely, even when they have disagreements, because it emphasizes dialogue, patience, and careful understanding instead of conflict or aggressive actions.
Another important word is sanctions, which are peaceful restrictions applied to encourage a country to act responsibly, and sanctions focus on economic and trade aspects rather than using military force. So learners should remember that sanctions are a tool for influencing behavior without causing direct harm to civilians or creating immediate conflict.
We also learned stability and regional stability, which describe calm and predictable situations in a country or region. And understanding these words helps learners see why nations work together with allies and international organizations to keep areas safe, because when stability is high, people, businesses, and governments can make decisions confidently.
Another useful term is myths and misunderstandings, which are ideas that are widely believed but are not completely accurate. And we saw that media can sometimes exaggerate or highlight dramatic events, which may create fear or confusion. So it is important for learners to check reliable sources and compare facts with exaggerated stories to build a balanced understanding of global events.
We also discussed uncertainty, which means not knowing exactly what will happen, especially in international relations. And learners should understand that predictions about the future are possibilities, not guarantees, because leadership changes, unexpected events, and regional developments can all influence the course of diplomacy and global interactions.
Finally, we looked at the idea of global concern, which means an issue in one country can attract attention from countries all over the world, even if it does not have a large economy or population. And understanding global concern helps learners see why nations cooperate and communicate with each other to reduce tension and create shared solutions for problems that affect more than one country. Now, let's practice comprehension with a few simple questions to help learners check their understanding. First, what does threat perception mean, and why is it different for each country? Second, what is diplomacy and how does it help countries solve problems? Third, what are sanctions, and how do they differ from military action? Fourth, why is regional stability important for countries living close to each other?
Fifth, what are myths and misunderstandings, and how can learners avoid believing exaggerated stories? Sixth, what does uncertainty mean in international relations, and why is it normal to have many possible outcomes? Seventh, what is global concern, and why can a small country's actions affect the whole world? Learners can answer these questions in simple sentences to strengthen both vocabulary and comprehension.
After answering these questions, learners can practice forming their own sentences using the new words, such as describing a situation in school, a local news story, or a daily event, which helps connect vocabulary with real life. And practicing in this way improves English speaking, writing, and thinking skills, while keeping learners confident and motivated in their journey.
Before we finish, I want to highlight the main idea of this reflection. Understanding international news is a skill that grows over time, and using clear vocabulary, simple explanations, and careful observation allows learners to follow complex topics without feeling overwhelmed, which shows that patience, repetition, and curiosity are important parts of learning English and understanding the world.
Finally, dear listeners, remember that learning English is like exploring a new country with a map. Sometimes paths are unclear, sometimes obstacles appear, but each step you take expands your view, strengthens your skills, and builds confidence. So continue listening, reading, practicing, and asking questions, because every small effort contributes to your growth, and your curiosity today will shape your understanding and success tomorrow.
Keep reflecting on the vocabulary, practice comprehension regularly, and connect what you learn to real-world examples, because this approach not only improves your English, but also helps you understand international topics calmly, thoughtfully, and accurately. And by combining study, practice, and curiosity, you are building a foundation for lifelong learning.
Remember, each day of learning adds a new layer of knowledge, and even small progress matters. Your attention, focus, and persistence create opportunities to understand new ideas, communicate clearly, and gain confidence in English. So continue your journey with patience, determination, and joy, knowing that every word, concept, and reflection brings you closer to mastery and deeper awareness of the world.